Section 4.2 Interactive Assignment, Objective 3 using StatCrunch. We are finding the residuals and the sum of the squared residuals. Now, if we're given the equation of a line that's containing the points -2, -2, and 2, 5, which is y equals 1.75x plus 1.5, what we want to do is we want to compute the sum of the squared residuals of the given data set for this line using StatCrunch. So one way of doing this is creating a table if we did this by hand. We have our x values, which contains the following values for x. We have our y values, which contain the following for y. And you can see that the first order pair, -2, -2, and then 2, 5 is here. Then we have our column that represents the equation. And then we have our column that represents the residual. And then we have the residual squared. Now, we want to be able to use StatCrunch to do this. So I'm going to open this data up into StatCrunch, and here are our order pairs. What we want to do is we want to be able to generate and build this equation so that we can plug in each value of x, and they can do it really quick on StatCrunch. So I'm going to select data. I'm going to come down here where it says compute and then select expression. And then I'm going to build this expression. So building this is I'm going to put in this equation. I'm going to start with 1.75. 1.75, I'm going to multiply it by x. So I'm going to select multiplication, and the column that I want to use is x. And then I'm going to select plus and then 1.5. And I'm going to go ahead and then select OK. Now I want to label the column. So I'm going to call this the predicted y value for the equation 1.75x plus 1.5, and I'm going to select compute. Okay, so now it created a column with these values. Now let's compare those values. Okay, so here are my already values that I've created. So let's take a look here. We plug in the value of -2 into the equation, we get -2. Okay? And we get -0.25. We get 1.5, 3.25, and then 5. Okay, so basically what it's done is taken the value of x, plugged it into that expression, and got us the values by using StatCrunch as opposed to doing it by hand. Now the next column is, we want to be able to find the residual. The residual is taking this y value in this column here, and then we're going to subtract the predicted y value. So now we're going to go back to now and select data and select compute and then expression. We're going to build an expression. So we're going to take the y value. That means that we're going to take the column for y, and then we're going to subtract minus. We're going to subtract the predicted y value that we got in this column. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to select OK. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to label this column and call it the residual for the equation 1.75x plus 1.5. So I'm going to call this the residuals. And so now what it's done is it's created these values here. Now let's check to make sure that those values match. Okay? So if I move this over a little bit, you can see that we get 0, -0.75, 0.5, -0.25, and 0. So again, this calculated that for us. Okay. Now, the next column, they want us to then square the residual. So in order to do that, we're now going to go ahead and go to data. We're going to select, again, compute, and then we're going to build another expression. Okay, so what are we going to build? Well, we want to be able to take these residuals and then square it. So all we need to do is select the column that we just created, which is the residuals for this equation. We're going to hit the up arrow key, which allows us to then square everything in that column. I'm going to select OK, and then I'm going to call this the residuals. Okay, so I'm going to call this the residuals for 1.75x plus 1.5, and that's squared. because we squared those values. So now we're going to go ahead and see how this matches with our information here. So there are our squared residuals, and you can see when we square the 0, we get 0. When we square the negative 0.75, we get 0.5625. We get 0.25, 0.0625, and then 0. Now, the goal is we want to find the sum of the squared residuals for the line that's containing those points. So the sum meaning we need to add up all these values in the column. So the best way to do that is now we're going to go to Stat, we're going to go to Summary Stats, and then select Columns. And then we want to find the sum for the last column that we created, which is the residuals for the 1.75x plus 1.5 squared. And then we're going to come down here, and then we're going to scroll down and then select the sum, because that's what we want. We want to add up everything in that column. We're going to select Compute, and if you notice, look at the sum there. We get 0.875, and down here, that's the answer that we end up getting, which is 0.875. So that would then be the answer for this question. The sum of the squared residuals for this equation is going to be 0.8750. Okay, now this was an equation that was given. Okay, now in the next question it says, compute the sum of the squared residuals of the given data set for the least squares regression line that was found in part A. What I mean by that is we were given this data, okay, and so now what we want to do is we want to find the least squared, okay, regression line for this set of data, okay. So in order to do that, we need to figure out what is that equation. So if we go to Stat and then go down to Regression and then select Simple Linear, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to select the x variable, which is x. We're going to select the y variable, which is y. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down a little further. Okay, and then what we want is the residuals of this data. Okay, because the residuals are going to create this, are going to use this least squares regression line for the data. So then what we're going to do is at this point it's going to create a column of the residuals there, and then we're going to select Compute. Okay, now if you take a look at this equation, the equation is y equals 1.4 plus 1.8x, or we can say this is y equals 1.8x plus 1.4. Okay, so let's take a look at that equation here. So this is our equation. So we would do the same thing. We're going to take our x values, we're going to plug it into this equation, okay, to get these values. So therefore, once we plug that in, it's going to give us this value. Now, this becomes the predicted y value. Okay, and then in order to find the residuals, okay, we need to take the y value and then subtract the predicted y value to get these numbers. Well, the nice thing about StatCrunch is since the data was already included and it already had this results in there, what we would do is now take a look at this new column that we created, which is the residuals. And those residuals are going to match these, which is 0.2, negative 0.6, 0.6, negative 0.2, and 0. Now, the thing with that is that this is the residuals for this equation. So I'm going to put in here for the equation 1.8x plus 1.4. So I know the difference between which equation is using what. So therefore, these are the residuals for this, right? Okay, now what we want to do is now we're going to create a new column, and then we're going to find the squares of the residuals. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select Data, come down here and select Compute, and then select Expression, and then we're going to build an expression. So if you notice, the last column that we created was the residuals for 1.8x plus 1.4. And what we want to do is we want to square that. So we're going to select the up arrow key, which allows us to square each individual value. And then we're going to select OK. And then we're going to call this residuals squared for the equation 1.8x plus 1.4. Okay, we're going to select compute. And now you should see that we have generated now another column to the right of that, which is the residuals squared. Now let's match those numbers with this last column. So here we have 0.04, 0.36, 0.36, 0.04, and then 0. And then our goal is to find the sum of the squared residuals for this column. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to select Stat, Summary Stat, go to Columns. Now, the column that we created is the last column that says residual squared for this equation. And then I'm going to come down here, and then what we want to do is we want to be able to find the sum of that column. So I'm going to select Sum and then select Compute. And if you notice, when I add up everything in here, I get 0.80, which gives me the same sum here. So that's how you find the sum of the squared residuals using StatCrunch.